you will find that quantum is coming much, much earlier than what people said. Okay. And I'll also, owe, like when I was at Intel, I was myopic in thinking that was decades away. But I think we are about 4 years away from real value created, not only in biology, but also in chemistry and in other areas. And I'll be talking about what we are doing with generative quantum AI, which is a combination of AI, quantum, and HPC, which is really going to benefit the field of chemistry and biology. Okay, I'll jump into it, but let me start off a little bit with a story. Right, I'll be interspersing stories. So the first city I came in, when I came here in 1988, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. I got rejected. I got selected, but got rejected. And they said I can be a test pilot to fly MiGs. And I said, nope, I'm going to go study instead. And I really wanted to be a combat pilot. My dad was a pilot. And I came to the US. So I landed here in New York City, was caught in a thunderstorm, but my destination was here, Boston, before I went to Cincinnati. My brother-in-law was a postdoc here at Harvard Medical School, and his mentor, or his the professor who was like coaching him, was actually Dr. Timothy Springer. Okay, and so I stayed here for a month, and I, was going. I really didn't want to go into the lab. He was doing research at the Harvard Medical Center, where they were doing the blood research. I hated blood. Okay, I didn't want to go to hospitals. I still don't like medicines, but that was my experience here in Boston, and a bunch of my friends were actually going to Northeastern also. So I was actually staying at right next to Fenway Park. There's the Children's Medical Center, and a lot of them stayed. The associates, the PhD students, the postdocs stayed in that building, and I had to walk across, to see my friends. There was a station called Huntington Avenue, I think. Is that right? Anybody who lives here? Yep. I used to, get stopped. It was a pretty dangerous walk. That's what I remember about Boston. Every time I used to be stopped for money, and I made a lot of friends. So those days I used to smoke, and I don't smoke anymore. But that was my experience in Boston. I got to see MIT, but at that time I didn't think that I will actually be helping in this medical field and helping my brother-in-law. There's a story which I'll talk about later. He's a professor at Emory, and he has a company. It's called Metaclips, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about Metaclips. And he's actually in clinical trials, okay, phase 1 right now, right? It took him several years to get there, and that journey is a long time in the drug, discovery field, right? So with that said, I'll keep walking through a little bit here. Okay, if I can actually get this thing to work. All right. So the first thing is, as I mentioned, objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. Quantum computing is much, much closer to reality than you think it is. Okay. And we at Quantinuum believe that we'll be part of the journey which will bring quantum closer to people. Okay. Today we have the highest fidelity machines. We have machines which cannot be simulated. We'll have another machine which is going to come up this year, which we call Helios, which is going to be capable of 1 trillion times more information than what we can do today with what we call H2. And we have a very strong software, layer. And there are several other companies also, right, which are also contributing to this view where objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. But we're running a real, or professional, you know, thousands of square feet cloud access to people all over the world. We have deployed a system in Japan. We're going to deploy it in multiple other countries. And this is why we believe that this is going to be happening much, much faster than you think. Okay. Now, of course, you would have seen several different viewpoints, okay, that have come up. There's a half glass full and there's a half glass empty viewpoint, right, that people come up with, which is, hey, you know what? In the last 5 years, more than 150 new computing startups, $2 billion raised by companies in 2024 alone. Okay. Quantum science and technology, $40 billion globally. You have seen that China is spending billions of dollars. We are spending billions of dollars. But if you look at what the NVIDIA CEO said, oh, it's going to be 2 to 3 decades. Mark Zuckerberg joined in this, and then you saw quantum stock plunge, and then we had the NVIDIA Quantum Day, which is at GTC, a couple of weeks back. Okay, and that's where uh, you heard Jensen come out and say that you know he wanted to hear from each of the CEOs why they believe that it's going to be earlier, and he apologized for what he said. And I think he's going to have this as a regular part of his GTC moving forward. Right, that was his promise at that event. There's also an NVIDIA center here, a quantum acceleration center here. Anybody from NVIDIA here at all? No. Okay, so yeah, so Elitsa is here. She lives here, and we will have, we are one of the founding partners there. We helped NVIDIA in CUDA-Q, right? But we started working with them about 2 years ago. And CUDA-Q is an important part of how you build the software for AI plus HPC plus quantum. And it used to be called CODA when we first announced it with NVIDIA 2 years ago. And we're excited about what we're going to do with them. So if anybody's using CUDA-Q, right? So you'll be able to access our machine remotely, right? You have a 90 days, you'll have the highest fidelity machine. You'll have free access to it for 90 days, and you can move to a larger machine if you wanted to. But starting off, this is huge, right? Anybody who uses CUDA-Q will be able to run on a real machine. You don't have to simulate it, okay? On a real quantum machine with 3 nines fidelity, right? So that's what we're bringing to the Acceleration Center, right? We're also working with them on other aspects where we'll use some of the architectures like Grace Hopper for quantum error correction and hybrid types of applications. Okay. All right. So something over there. Okay, good. So, at least at our company, we believe we're going to be, not working. We're going to, best way to predict the future is to create it, right? That's our policy at Quantinuum. And that's the policy of a lot of the quantum companies, right? Which is what is exciting. And at this point, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. Okay. So I have had the pleasure of working in 2 inflection points in the world since I was born, right? The PC thing happened when I was in school, so I really didn't participate in it. Uh, However, my first job was at Motorola. So at Motorola, I had the privilege of working on smartphones and driving, some of the technologies that we all use today that we take for granted, like 3G, LTE. All of that happened, in that first inflection point. Smartphones just changed the way we do stuff today. Right? The second part of what I was participating in at Intel was driving accelerated computing. Right, I worked with NVIDIA also, right, to go develop these, software packages, the way that you develop applications. Yes, there was fierce competition, right? Intel did not believe that you needed a GPU. Okay, I fought for a GPU since 2005. I finally got a GPU, which is now in Aurora, which is the machine Robert was talking about. It was called Ponte Vecchio, right? But NVIDIA has got a very strong roadmap and a software package, which really created that inflection point with AI, right? So I had the pleasure of being in both of those inflection points. I think the next inflection point is quantum computing. Okay? I wouldn't say I'm a quantum, I'm not a GPU expert, right? I'm a SIMD computer architect expert, right? Not a GPU expert. But the same way, I believe that quantum computing is really going to be the next inflection point. And from what I'm seeing in the industry, this is going to be the game changer, right? The way we look at what is created in the world is going to change. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and she asked me, "What do you do?" And then I said, "Well, with the technology I'm developing, you'll get a slime that won't dry up for a year." Okay. And she was like, "Wow, really?" Okay. So I spend a fortune on slime for her, right? She needs to be crushing something all the time. she's got, the nervousness that she has to get used to it, and it's a lot of money that you spend. I said, hey, that's what it's going to do. I was just kidding, but that's kind of what quantum computing is going to be able to do, I believe, in the next few years. Okay. And as I said, right, when you talk about quantum computer, I remember, some of the experts about 10 years ago used to come and tell me, you know what, I need millions and zillions of qubits for anything useful to be done. Okay. And the more and more, right, I look at it, yes, you would need it if you had a quantum only piece of software you wanted to write. Okay. But if you combine it with AI and quantum and HPC, you can actually get things done today, right? With about 100 logical qubits, I think you will be able to change what is possible. Okay. With that said, I think that's why the next industrial revolution is really AI plus quantum. I'm going to try to play. This is not, I wish I could.
Within a defined range of information. But quantum data tells a story unrestricted by time and space. Spooky action. From black holes and galaxies to the smallest universes that exist inside a single atom. Just as a telescope or a microscope brings unseen details into focus, quantum data provides new visibility, unveiling.
Sorry. Unfortunately,
Switch off the mic if you can switch off.
and I think this, okay, this is, okay, that's better now. All right, we got that out of the way. I think this is the thing that can actually change how we look at how quantum can bring benefit right away, right? Which is a combination of generative AI and using quantum computers to actually generate data, right? Which you cannot get from a classical computer. Okay. So I'll get into a little bit more in terms of an example flow, which is what I'm comfortable with, right? I'm used to LLMs and neural networks, and we'll show you how we're doing this generative quantum AI stuff as I move forward. Let me see. I'll get into this one, right, as we get further. So the basic idea is very simple, okay? Is when you are running, when you have a large language model and you're trying to do some analysis on the types of molecules that you want, the only way that the LLM is going to give you an answer is with the data that you have. The data you have is either by measurements or classical simulations. Okay. Using the generative quantum AI approach, what we can do is actually have the LLM generate a quantum circuit. Okay. And the quantum circuit will run on a quantum computer and come back with quantum data. The LLM will make a decision to say, hey, did it meet the purpose? And that closed loop system will go on until you get the data close enough, right, to what the LLM thinks is good enough to move to the next stage. Okay. And that is what we've been doing with the generative AI stuff. Okay. So if you look at, this is where I want to give an example of what my brother-in-law's company is doing, right? He's a professor at Emory, and he's got a company called MetaClips. And I asked him, hey, what is that? Why did you come up with MetaClips? He said, it's to eclipse metastasis, right? That was his reason. And so he is basically coming up with a cancer vaccine. But as part of his process, right, he still has to create an mRNA vaccine. he gets, explained this to me. He gets the stuff from the tumor. He said there are multiple peptides. He creates. He's got a patented approach where he uses this thing which kills, um, you know, uh, the bad stuff, I guess. But then he still has to get an mRNA vaccine. So he works with a company called Syntaco Bio. Okay, I don't know how many of you know about them. Anybody knows about Syntaco Bio? Okay, so Syntaco Bio basically is doing the complete simulation in AI. Okay, they do the whole thing in AI, and they have a wet bench which checks to see which peptides will bind. Okay, and create the mRNA vaccine. Okay, but as part of their process, right, they actually have to do HPC simulations. That HPC simulations can only go to a certain extent. They go through a large set of molecules and they come back with a small set of molecules which they can do simulations on. And that's where you can replace that classical loop with a quantum simulation. Okay, so that's the type of effort that you can do with quantum computing, which can actually get you more accuracy. Okay, so some of the places where we're working, you can see Amgen is an investor. We're working with Singapore from a computational biology standpoint. We're looking at metal organic frameworks for drug delivery. We're working on other stuff such as we worked with Amgen on peptide binding using quantum machine learning. It's not Gen QAI, but some of the places we're using Gen QAI is really in metal organic frameworks and seeing how we can get it to do drug delivery. And uh, we'll have a presentation which Dr. Gabriela is going to be presenting. She's actually been in the medical field for a long, long time. But uh, it was this morning, so everybody here has heard it. No? Okay. Right. So I think so. This is one area where we believe that the accuracy that quantum computing can build in combination with NLM and Gen QAI is actually going to produce something which will be very, very useful in drug delivery. Right now, getting it out in the market, of course, is something that has to be worked on. Like I said, it took my brother-in-law many, many years before he got into phase one clinical trials. Right. So the other areas that we're working on is in energy, where one of the places we worked on is with Total on metal organic framers again for carbon sequestrations. The same thing which can be used for medicines can also be used for carbon sequestration. We're also working with Honeywell on new types of refrigerants uh, and other areas, that we don't have any customers to show, but we have some work on catalysts for fertilizer production. You've probably heard about this as a big application for quantum computing. So it's another place that we work in, with Equinor, for example. And of course, finance is a huge, huge area. We're actually deploying today with quantum computing. Okay, so we have a product which we call Quantum Origin. Okay, which is basically the entropy source, which is probably random, right? It uses bell tests. So whatever random bits that we get out of this Quantum Origin product is something that is not a pseudo random generator. So how many of you are familiar with how you do what SSL is? Okay, good, right? Perfect, right? So SSL basically uses uh, keys. Okay, you use the keys to encrypt your data, right? And there is a protocol which everybody's scared of that quantum computing is going to break, which is the RSA protocol, right? Which is an asymmetric keys. But the keys come from a random number. The random number comes from an entropy source. Okay, today's entropy source on your phone, right, or your laptop is coming from the chip which is in there. It's an Intel chip and an ARM chip, right? And it is a pseudo random number generator, right? So what it does is you can actually, there are people who will try to replicate how these numbers are generated and try to create a formula, right? Which is kind of going back to, hey, you know what? A random number, you have a formula which is a series that you can actually generate, right? That's kind of how people try to break your random number, your random seed, and hence your key. Okay. So using the technology which comes out of a quantum computer, using the Bell test, which actually proves, right, there's no, formula which can represent those bits that come out. We have a way by which you can provide the entropy. Okay. So, for example, today, when you when you have an Amazon instance, what happens? Right? You have a virtual computer which is formed, but they don't have random bits ready to go. So, in fact, when you have an instance that is created, there's a bucket of bits which is given to the virtual machine so that you can start doing transactions, security transactions right away. Okay. And using our approach, we have a software based approach which uses a random seed from a quantum computer, which is, we actually announced today that it's NIST, it passed the NIST certification we call quantum origin, which can be used in the financial field. Okay. We also announced with JPMC the concept of certified randomness along with JPMC and Argonne National Labs and University of Texas Austin for a certified randomness in approach, which is very similar to quantum origin but slightly different. So this goes back to what is happening in the quantum field, right? If you look back at if you look at the GPU field and the quantum field, right, and you try to map, what happened with GPUs and what's happening with quantum, you know, the age of discovery is what was happening, which is kind of done, right? We're at this point of acceleration, right, where we're going to have 10 to the minus 3, 10 to the minus 5 error rates. We have multiple machines coming there, new types of software approaches with generative quantum AI, where we can actually start building applications. And in 2029, that's the start of the age of scale. Okay. We believe that we'll be at about 10 minus 5 to 10 minus 10 in terms of error rates, which logical qubits, right? If you look at where your laptop is at, it's 10 minus 18, those kinds of numbers, right? In terms of the error rates. And our machine, which we target, which is called Quantinuum Apollo, we'll have thousands of qubits, hundreds of logical qubits. And that's when I think we'll have the age of scale. We'll have real applications which is delivering value for customers. And we believe we'll be at 1 million qubits in the 32 timeframe, okay, in our next machine. So quantum computing is happening fast, okay? And of course, there's no point in having a hardware if you don't have the underlying software and the applications. With AI and quantum and Gen QAI, as we call it, generative quantum AI, we believe will be a game changer in the drug discovery, the drug delivery by 2029. Okay, you have to start the journey today, and we are starting it with multiple folks as we talked. Okay? And we can talk more during the panel. Hopefully, I haven't taken too much time, but this is where the quantum industry is moving very, very fast. If you go back to GPUs, you can look at 2005, right, when people were using, gaming GPUs to do stuff. Then you had Volta, then you had Ampere, right? They were not data center ready yet, right? So we have some experts here from NVIDIA who can talk to that, right? Slowly they got it data center ready, right, to having an application, right, with AI, which around the 2017, 2018 time frame, which got you to the big jump in Hopper. Okay, it was a long journey, right? About 15 years, I would say. Okay, this is much, much shorter. Of course, to get to this part, right, Quantinuum was a business combination of Honeywell Quantum Systems and Cambridge Quantum Systems, right? They've had tens of years of development to get here. But at this point, right, it's an engineering problem, right? We think we have solved the scaling problem, we've solved the speed problem. We'll be at a point where you're going to be having useful quantum computing with real applications in the 2029 timeframe. Okay. So our CEO, he loves to say this, and I kind of been using this also. Uh, I'm 58 years old. I tell my son too, it's like, you got to do this because I don't think I can do it after 6 or 7 years. But the pace of change has never been this fast, right? And it'll never be this slow again. I mean, a lot of you have kids here. I just can't keep up with my kids when it comes to the information that they can absorb, right, from the phone or the laptop. They're about 10x faster than I was at their age, right? So I think this is just going to get faster and faster, and it'll never be this slow again, whether it be technology or the intake of intelligence, by humankind. So some of the things that support the advances in quantum computing, right, which is happening. You've seen our announcement with SoftBank, where we talked about how we're going to be developing practical applications and driving towards commercial applicability of quantum computers. Uh, we also have independent benchmark, which we found on the suddenly it just popped up, done by Ulick, which showed what is extremely important, right, for quantum computing, and how Quantinuum was leading there in that pack. And then we had this NVIDIA Acceleration Center, right? We have the biggest AI company driving, the future of accelerated computing with AI and quantum. And with GenQ I believe that for every cycle of quantum, you'll probably need 3 cycles of GPUs. So it's actually better for GPUs to work with quantum, right? So that industry is going to grow also with quantum. And I talked about certified randomness and things. So a lot of advances happening so quickly that you know before you know it, you're going to have quantum computing building your favorite material that you always dreamt of. Okay. I think it's not one company which can do it. It's all of us. We got to build this together, and that's why this ecosystem is extremely important. It's about the hardware, it's about the software. It's people like Qubit Pharma, right? I mean, I am learning more about Qubit Pharma, and Andrea, thank you for sending me the information about what your company does. Super impressive, and it's the whole ecosystem which is actually going to make this successful, and it's not one company. And I think everybody here, you know, is really going to make a difference in making this quantum computing a reality, and something which is going to benefit, I think the whole world with where this journey is going. Okay, thank you, and looking forward to the panel, and I'll be here, and we can talk further. And yep, have a great day. We have our MC.
All right, just give us a couple minutes as we get organized. Hi, I'm Larissa Biafano. I'm a partner at DLA Piper, and I'm moderating our panel today. Excited to be here. Excited so many people are interested in talking about quantum computing on a Wednesday in April. So just give us a few minutes to get set up, and we'll be ready to go. Maybe grab a drink while we're waiting. All right. Oh, we are going to have chairs.
Do you have a slide background or do you want me
Oh, okay, so I'll share my numbers here. And then I'll pick one. Okay. Okay. And then what do you want to, for timing? What time is there a closing thing? Like what time do you want me to be done? Yeah. When do you want me to be done? Where do you want to sit? So yes. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the Nash's amazing talk and then the short break to connect with everyone and talk about what we just learned. And now we're going to have a panel discussion about quantum. And I just want to say that I really liked Robert's talk at the beginning because what I thought was fascinating what he said is that in 15 years, we're going to think that quantum is boring and we need to look on for the next technology. And I really hope that that's true because I would just, as a side note, I used to do a lot of, so my name is Larissa Biafano. I'm a patent attorney at DLA Piper. I studied physics in undergrad, decided to be a lawyer and get to work with exciting technologies and emerging technologies. And I did a lot of work in AI. And then ChatGPT came out and everybody used AI and everybody knew what AI was. And I was like, this is kind of boring now. I don't want to do this anymore. So then I got really excited about quantum computing because quantum computing is really hard. And you have to have a lot of innovation and a lot of advancement to make it work. So there's lots of problems to be solved. So I love that Robert said 15 years, we're going to say quantum's boring. So let's hope we get there. But we have a lovely panel today. So I'm going to have everyone on the panel introduce themselves and then we'll go through some questions and then we'll have some time for you guys to ask this great panel some questions. Okay. So Andrea.
I'm Andrea D'Souza, Qubit's Chief Corporate Development Officer, and my journey into quantum is accidental, just like my journey into NVIDIA was accidental. And to build upon the story that Nash shared, it was 2009, I think. Bill's here. There's a bunch of other people that I work with. The Bro were here. And I went for my interview at the Broad, and I saw the genomics displays up there. And I was like, how do they do that? Why does it look so pretty? And the person who was doing the tour said to me, oh, that's a GPU. And I'm a biotech pharma person. I was coming from Amgen at that time. And I said, what's a GPU? And they explained to me what a GPU was. And I said, wow, that's going to change the world. Fast forward, I was running Lilly's HPC Center after leaving NVIDIA, along with the data and the AI team. And I started to hear these rumblings about quantum. And so I said, oh dear, I'm going to have to take a quantum class. So I take Will's quantum class. And, you know, he goes over pi over 2 in the circle. I'm thinking, do I really need to know all of this at this point? But anyways, that was 2.5 years ago. And that's how I stumbled into this next evolution. And having put NVIDIA on the map for AI in pharma, I genuinely believe quantum and quantum AI together will have a bigger impact for our industry than just AI alone.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Christoph Jerzak. I'm managing partner at a venture fund called Quantonation, based in Boston and in Paris. So we made investments, performed investments in 32 companies so far, really focusing on quantum since 2018. So I've been in quantum a little bit longer, actually probably, well, not probably, early 90s. So it's not 100 years old like we're celebrating today, but yeah, it's going to be soon. Well, it is actually 30 years, 30 plus. Which is pretty crazy. At the time, I was a student of Alain Aspect, who came to be Nobel Prize laureate in 2022. At the time, we were building neutral atoms traps. Was not really useful for anything. I think like was fun, nice physics, metrology maybe, not super exciting for many, or not to me at least at the time. But then fast forward, indeed, back in 2015, I was living in the Bay and I heard about Rigetti, IonQ. 2016, IBM put a couple of qubits online, which was stunning for me. Like you could have access to these machines. I coded a little bit, so it was crazy. So it got me to come back to the field actually and launch Quantonation. Just want to mention there's a special person here today, Olivier Ezrati. He's a French guy like me. I met with him back in 2018. Actually, at the same time I was launching the fund. He's an engineer by training, and he felt like there was something happening in quantum as well, actually. So he started to educate himself on the topic, and he's been publishing since then, actually, a book which is a reference if you want to understand quantum technologies. It's called Understanding Quantum Technologies. It's free. PDF can be downloaded online. You can talk to him as well. It's pretty amazing, 2,000 pages, a bit long. I'm doing the forward every year. 1,500, but 200 pages in addition every year. So I think it's a bit much, but it's pretty good as well if you want to get into the field. So lots of things have happened. Very excited to be here talking about applications and real life. That's really what has happened. And 30 years is not such a long time, actually, when you think of it. I mean, from the time I was in the lab to now where I'm seeing, so one of our portfolio company is called Pascal. They're building machines, shipping machines, putting them on a plane, delivering them to places hundreds of miles away. I mean, that's crazy when you think of it. And 30 years, again, not very far. So to your point, I think 3-4 years from now, I hope, yeah, it will be even better. But we're on the right track. So happy to have this conversation today. Thank you.
I think I've introduced myself enough, but just a little bit, I'm not going to ask you a grade when you took his class, but physics was not my best subject, so I'm learning a lot. And in fact, last night I was, trying to read up on aspects, experiment, and it was fun actually seeing what they did. So it was, I think it's a fun part, to be in the quantum world today. So I'm enjoying it.
Great, thanks, Nash. My name's Will Oliver. I'm a professor at MIT. I'm actually an engineer. I trained as an engineer. I'm also in the physics department. And you did great in the class, by the way, Andrea. I just want to make sure it's clear to everyone. And +1 on the book as well. Started my career back in 2003 at MIT's Lincoln Lab, which you may know is a Department of Defense lab working on superconducting qubits. Over the years, things got better and better, and it transitioned from what you might call a scientific curiosity, and now it's becoming a technical reality. I'm looking forward to talking with you about that.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Rohit Arora. I am I'm what is called an innovation lead at the Bioinnovation Hub of Novo Nordisk. I'm just across the street from here in the 255 Main Street. I'm not an expert in quantum technology. I'm a quantum enthusiast at best. But I'm a computational chemist by training, and I did study quantum chemistry when I was, studying chemistry. It was one of the most exciting things I'd done. But that was back in India, and that was at a time when you couldn't expect a career in quantum. Essentially, things were very, very early stage, and you couldn't really imagine this being a feasible technology, even in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But just like AI, and I think Andrea alluded to that a little bit, things are changing fast. And I was reminded of the book I read from Nick Bostrom, Superintelligence, and that was published in 2019, 2020. And in that, Nick says that the artificial general intelligence AGI is at least 30, 40 years away, and he's one of the top guys who people listen to him. And 2 years later, you've got ChatGPT, very close to proving him wrong. Today there was I think I forget, was it GPT 4.0? I forget exactly which model, which came close to passing the Turing test. It's yeah, okay. So things are moving fast, and my role at the Bioinnovation Hub, we are a co-creation unit. We co-create technologies along with external partners, both in industry and academia. So as my focus on data science, AI, and machine learning has led me to also dabble into more quantum technologies, and I would like to bring more of those technologies inside Novo. We are currently running some projects in the early stage drug discovery and development, and also sort of on the late development side of things, which I'm not involved in, but I'm aware of it. But we are, as an industry, I think pharma has become very receptive to technologies like quantum, and I think it needs to be seen, of course, how it changes things down the road. But things are looking promising, interesting, and I would like to keep pushing for that to happen, at least at Novo.
Great. Well, I'm going to also give a plug for Will Oliver has an online class, right, for quantum computing that I took last year. Did you take that one, or did you take? Okay. So I took it last year, and it was great. I learned so much. So thank you.
Well, thanks for saying that. If anybody would like to learn more about it, by all means, shoot me an email.
Yeah, it was a really great class, especially if you're not as familiar with quantum. It gives a really nice background, and then you do have to do some coding. Which
but we hold your hand, right?
Yeah, you do. You do. It's great.
We totally hold your hand. No, it's a professional development class meant for people who are professionals in industry, but they didn't do a PhD in physics, and they want to just basically get an intro primer. What is quantum? Why is it useful, et cetera?
Yeah. And when is that launching? Is it soon, right?
Oh, it runs continuously. So there's a new one that is starting in early April, which I guess is right about now.
Yeah. Right.
Next week, I think.
Awesome. Well, check it out. And then sort of pivoting building a little bit on what Rohit just said, where are we in applying quantum in the pharmaceutical industry? So maybe Andrea, Rohit, can you talk about that?
Sure, I can talk about, from my vantage point, I think, I can't speak on behalf of any specific companies, but, you read a lot about companies like Roche, Amgen, and I think Nash talked about that earlier. The thing is that quantum is good for very, very complex problems. And I think in my opinion, and, no offense to physics, but you find a lot of complex problems in drug discovery because there are just permutation and combinatorics problems, optimization problems, sampling problems, which because the chemical space, for instance, is so large. If you try to even in silico try to sample every single molecule, a small molecule, and try to bind it to a single conformation of a protein, it is a fairly intractable problem, and that will not even give you the best result because protein don't exist as static. They're dynamic, so you have to essentially test it against multiple conformations at the very least. So that's just one example. Anything which requires that level of simplification of that level of complexity could use quantum, and problems in the pharma and early stage drug discovery especially are abound. So to that end, there have been a lot of startups, even large companies, which have jumped into the space and offered solutions, and we are seriously considering them as something which can deploy at scale. And actually, I mean, it remains to be seen, because in the end, what matters in pharma, can you deliver a drug or not? So it's going to take some time, but I think the way things are progressing, and the mood of the industry, especially after the AI revolution, there is a lot of excitement, and people are receptive to the idea of using quantum technologies in the life science industry.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. Quantum computing in particular doesn't apply to every single problem that we're trying to solve in drug discovery, development, or manufacturing. There's machine learning and optimization problems, especially with the inflection into quantum AI, that makes perfect sense. So I'll give you 3 examples that just resonate, both from a quantum mechanics really is the underlying discipline. He's going to explain his amazing saying about quantum being the operating system of life. Is that right?
The world.
of the world. Yeah. But basically, there's quantum mechanics, and we use those underlying principles for quantum chemistry, for quantum biology, and for quantum computing. So really, we're back to understanding physics. How does the molecule perturb the target? Reactivity. At the end of the day, if you want to build a covalent binder for a target, that's chemistry. And governing that chemistry is the field of polarizable field forces. And Schrodinger was one of the first companies that brought some of that. We've got Jay here and the founders of our company who spent 30 years making that much, much better. And now where we are in that inflection for drug discovery from a small molecule perspective is we're actually building a quantum chemistry database, building block-centric approach, not the way we've traditionally done it for years, doing that on exascale computing coming out of Intel, and then feeding that into an algorithm and launching a foundation model. So that's game-changing. Two other use cases that just make intuitive sense to me is one is image analysis. So somebody talked about cancer. And when the cancer starts to mutate, you typically get very early signals of that, and you can detect that in the image. But you have a very, very small data set. So where quantum is uniquely different from my perspective from AI is it's not as data hungry. And you can use some of the novel approaches that everyone's inventing, innovating with to better elucidate those early changes. And the last big wish I have for quantum in our industry is injection site response. A lot of us who have chronic diseases take injections, and that's some combination of the formulation, the medicine, and our genetics. It kind of integrates all of the use cases that Nash was talking about. How do you use quantum mechanics, quantum chemistry, quantum computing to better discern building and designing better drugs? That's what we are at Qubit.
Can I add something? Yeah. I think one thing that, and I forgot to mention, I'm an investor in Qubit Pharmaceuticals as well, actually. So we've been investors since day one with the founder, alongside the founders, worked with Robert and the team. There's a bunch of people from Qubit here. Maybe you can raise your hand. A bit of advertising for them. Thank you. I think what's really spectacular in pharma, and the reason I think it's been successful looking for projects. By the way, Novo is an investor into our fund, so we're connected as well. The nice thing is that in pharma, you have computational chemists who are not experts in quantum science in the sense of quantum computing, for example, but who are really open to new technologies, new computing technologies, and they have their benchmarks. They know how to run things on CPUs, GPUs. Whatever a new technology is coming, they benchmark it. They check: is it working? Is it not? If it works, let's use it. In many other sectors, and I've seen that quite a lot, and I think it's not very healthy. Usually, you have and sorry about that, Will, but usually you have physicists proposing solutions, which is not a great idea. Actually, I think you want to have the chemists really realize that quantum is a technology they need. It's going to be the same for materials design or other technologies. I think for me, pharma is pretty interesting and it's spectacular. The progress is pretty spectacular because there's this debate, and we need absolutely that. Only physicists on their own, when you ask them, they will tell you cannot simulate chemistry unless you have a quantum computer, which is wrong, obviously. But they think you need a quantum computer. On the other end, the chemists are much more aware of the potential of the technology. So I think this kind of debates, is really what's needed to, really multidisciplinarity. As we know, it's difficult to do it in academia, but you can do it in a company, in a startup, and create the conditions for success. And I think it's been really good so far, and I look forward to more progress.
Go ahead.
Can I just one thing that I think I had a discussion with Andrea about this yesterday, and just to your point about chemists need to know that quantum is helpful for them. I think so do biologists, and AI went through this phase when AI was new. People were scratching their heads like, oh, how does this work? I don't understand it. It's something beyond my, what I need. But suddenly it became very user-friendly. In 2022, it became a pop culture phenomenon, and everybody's using it. And everybody's company has some customized version of AI for your Copilot or for your ChatGPT or your Claude or whatever. and you're using it in your daily tasks, summarizing emails or whatever. I think there has to be a biologists or chemists don't really understand necessarily how quantum can help them. I think if the quantum community can speak their language, to explain to them how this is feasible and why this technology is the technology which is going to solve the underlying fundamental problem of a complex biology, because biology inherently is complex. This is the reason we are not able to, understand different targets in different pathways acting together, for instance, in a disease, and let's say in polygenic disease. So these are hard problems to solve. So if you are able to explain to them these are fundamental problems which can be solved by quantum, or at least you can get an insight into these problems, I think that can help with adoption of these technologies much faster. And I think, and I'm confident that can happen, because it has happened with AI, and I think there's a way forward. But I think that's another conversation that needs to be had, because quantum is not yet an everyday term people think about in their daily lives.
Great. And then, as one thing that Christoph mentioned was talking about how maybe the quantum computers aren't quite ready yet to do these types of calculations we want it to do, but we can simulate it or emulate a quantum computer using a classical computer. So Nash and Will, can you guys talk about those applications and what's around now that can do that?
Sure. I think firstly, going back to the point about where is classical computer today and where is quantum today, right? So I have some interesting anecdotes, right? When you look at HPC today, high performance computing, uh, and there was a quote from the DOE, the national labs, which have the biggest systems on the planet, that 50% of their classical cycles are used. 50%, okay, of those exascale machines are used to simulate quantum phenomena. Okay, so now you can understand, right, where quantum computing can actually come into play and do better things, right, in the energy field and all the research that is happening in the DOE labs, which is beyond energy also, right? So if you look at the other aspect of classical computing, right, today a lot of people use GPUs plus CPUs to simulate your quantum software, right? But you can only do it up to a certain number of qubits, and if you have more and more correlation and entanglement, you stop at about 40. Okay, then you need a real quantum computer, right? And that's why it's important, right, to have the transition. And when I first entered this field about I think this was in 23 December, I think, and I looked at it and said, you know what? People talk about a million qubits. How are you going to debug a million qubit software? How are you going to write it? Right. So I think there's lots of work which needs to be done in that space of how you would actually write a million qubit software, right? And that's where simulation will still hold, I think, right? I believe that to develop quantum software, you'll need a simulation ability where you'll do it in blocks, right? Maybe 40 qubits, and then you'll say, okay, now I'm going to like scale it up to 100 and run it on a quantum computer, scale it up to 10,000, and that's how it's going to work, right? So I'm trying to visualize what it'll look like as we move forward on the planet, and I think there is a symbiosis of classical computers needed as well as quantum computers. But today's HPC stuff, right? I think 50% of cycles is doing quantum phenomenon. So you can see quantum computers directly fitting in there. So lots of the software plumbing needs to be figured out for hybrid computation, right? And that's kind of the stuff which we're doing in Japan, for example. We need open standards for that. We need open standards for everything in hybrid, computing, right? So that's one thing which is lacking. And another thing is also lacking is benchmarks, right? Today in the HPC field, you can take streams, you can take linpack, and you kind of know, okay, great, right? You have a computer that is better than the other, right? When you look at the exascale, the number one supercomputer, today if you look at it, there's so many benchmarks in quantum, right? And it's not even clear how people run it, right? So we run every benchmark we can think of, right? I mean, IBM came up with something called quantum volume. We ran it, we are at 2 million, the next one is at 512, but nobody does it, right? So we can't force any other quantum computing company to do it either, right? And so I think there's lots of benchmarking and standardization which needs to happen in the quantum computing industry to really go figure out, okay, which one should I put in a hybrid environment, right? So lots of things, are needs to happen, and I'm talking like a computer engineer here and not as a quantum algorithm person. So hopefully this gives you my view on how this thing is going to evolve.
Right.
Competition sort of force that kind of benchmarking.
Well, we should, I think, as an industry, drive benchmarking, right? I mean, we believed in some benchmarks. I mean, right now we do every benchmark, but it's not feasible, right, for any company to say, okay, I'm going to do 35 different benchmarks, right? And so I think the industry needs to start coming up with ways by which you can actually say, okay, this system is, meeting these criteria, right? So, for example, in AI, there's something called ML-Perf. You have, HPCG. So there's lots of things on the HPC world which you can determine, the system and how good it is, right? So there's lots of work which needs to be done there.
Can Will comment on a concept of simulation, emulation, and where we are in that journey? Because I think it's a complex concept, and it tends to confuse a lot of the quantum curious, quantum naive.
Yeah, I distinguish those two words myself. Maybe I did it in the course too. So for me, an emulation is often what we do with quantum systems today, which is we'll set up a sea of qubits. We have many of them, and we tailor what their individual energies are and how they connect to one another. And then we set it in some initial state and we let it go and we see where it ends up. And so in that sense, it is emulating another physical system. And maybe it's hard to simulate that system on a classical computer, but if we just set it up in the right conditions, our quantum computer, it will eventually, and it will evolve in time to the answer that perhaps we are looking for. So that to me is emulation. Simulation, I guess I already used the word, is that, okay, I can't do that. So I'm going to use a program and gates, and I'm going to run an algorithm which itself mimics all of that dynamics that I'm trying to understand. And through that leads to an answer. Now, that answer may not be exact because the way that I represent it in a program may not capture every single thing that's happening in that physical system. Often it does not. And in fact, that is a field called quantum chemistry. I have many colleagues in quantum chemistry. They're not really doing quantum computing, but what they are doing is writing classical computer programs to try to simulate the chemistries and their reactions and how they go. So that's how I would distinguish simulation and emulation.
Got it. Okay. So now, big question for you guys. How is the pharmaceutical industry going to change with the prevalence of quantum computers? I don't know who wants to start with that. Maybe Christoph, do you want to give us an overview?
Not obvious, but maybe how it will change. I would just, well, I'm not an expert in pharma, but I think more interesting maybe, and maybe I anticipate a little bit, is how it should, or how the industry should move to capture the value actually, and how it could be implemented. I think one thing I'm really, but we mentioned that a little bit, I really don't believe in a quantum computer like solving all the problems. Like it's not just one single calculation of orbitals and it's done. Like you have all the chemistry solved, all the dynamic of reaction solved, and it's over. I really see quantum computing much more as a coprocessor in combination with other technologies. You mentioned that, so that's the notion of hybrid that we were talking about here. I think, let's say, in a computational workflow that you have in chemistry, to me, even if, 15% of the workflow was moving to quantum processors, because that's where it's really efficient and important, and it's going to save, energy, it's going to make things more accurate, it's going to make computation go faster. Well, maybe the combination of the three, I think that would be enough. Like that's what we should look for, like in a real life workflow, find the spot specifically where things are interesting and where there's a good reason to transition to quantum, but not the machine that will solve all the problems of the world. I think there's often a confusion about that. People tend to think that we're going to move to quantum computing all of a sudden. And yeah, it's not wrong. Well, it's not wrong. It's not right. Sorry, it's wrong. I think we will have, and that's what really gets us excited, in particular about companies like Qubit, for example, is because they're running on GPUs today, and progressively they will run on so-called QPUs for part of the workflow, placement of water molecules in reactions, for example, that kind of thing. So for me, I think I anticipate that indeed in the pharma industry, like in materials as well, which is also solid-state materials for batteries, other stuff. I think it's also a pretty good example, pretty good use case. Progressively, success will be that we will have some parts of our workflow dedicated to quantum processors. I anticipate, tend to agree that it will come faster than we have believed so far, but we should put our best minds on that, really finding the spot in a computational workflow where it makes sense.
No, I think I completely agree with what was said. A hybrid framework, I think, is probably what we'll see in the next 5-10 years in the pharma industry. But I think it's really important to understand, especially from an early discovery point of view, what are the pain points? Where do we spend the most amount of time, which takes so long to bring the drug to the market? So there's obviously many pain points, but so if you can just focus on those pain points and figure out if these can be resolved or sort of accelerated using any quantum technologies, I think that's going to be the aim. So as I said in a previous example, a sampling problem in an in silico virtual screen is key, because a lot of in the small molecule space, a lot of low-hanging fruits have been picked. So you're really now there are different AI algorithms, active learning approaches to scour the chemical space, which is immensely it's huge. It's 10 to the 60 or something. And trying to figure out the best scaffold design from that space and then optimizing that thing. It's a very difficult problem, because you have to make a lot of approximations, because if you try to do every single sort of in silico test, it will take you a long time, a lot of compute, and probably several years, and it's obviously not feasible. So quantum computing can be very useful there, because now you are trying to resolve a sampling problem there. Similarly, in a design space, when you have a good candidate and you want to help a chemist design new ideas from that small molecule, you can think about, there's GANs, generative adversarial networks in machine learning. Now there are QGANs, which can improve the process, accelerate the process by orders of magnitude. So those are the few ideas which can help with the early discovery side of things. But also, what Qubit is doing, for instance, applying quantum chemistry at scale, I think that can be immensely, I think it's very underappreciated field, and I think it can be immensely helpful overall to the industry. And finally, speaking of the late development side of things, on the clinical trials, for instance, that takes very, very long. So because a lot of companies are competing for the same patient populations, not always the best thing. It is not easy to run trials, especially in very hot fields like in the cardiometabolic space, for instance. Quantum computers can and are starting to help with building digital twin models, for instance. They are able to simulate entire placebo control populations, and it's getting somewhere. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you will see more of that applied and more of that actually yielding some results. And we will be able to say that quantum was applied, I'm using the term as a generic term, that quantum technology was applied in getting this drug to the market.
Anyone else want to comment?
So in my first job at Motorola, they used to call me Pluto Nash. So I'll give you my Pluto Nash view of where this could be, right? So when we were kids, right, like I think you mentioned it, right? Quantum is nature, right? And you mentioned the digital twin, right, of human beings. So when we were kids and we went to the village, this is in the 70s, right? We didn't have like doctors and stuff like that. We had like local folks, right, who would come in. You felt sick, they created the medicine for you then, right? And they felt you, they looked at your weight, they looked at what your symptoms were. It wasn't the same thing for everybody, right? It was personalized, right? And I know it's a long way away, right? And I think that's kind of where we can go if we can get to the digital twin, right? That's way out there. But we got to make money now from a commercial standpoint, right? So I think the places where this is going to see quicker effect is actually going, where people are in their phase 1 clinical trials and seeing how we can help them. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to do, right? That's why I mentioned my brother-in-law too. Is how can we help them get their workflow out there and faster, right? Otherwise, this seems to take a very long time today in the field, right? So yes, we should work on those longer term stuff too. But in shorter term, we should see how we can help in these clinical trials, right? Like for example, finding the right mRNA vaccine, for example, right? What's the right thing that you put together for a patient? It's personalized for the patient, right? So those kinds of things is where I think immediate use will come in, from quantum computing, and but in the future, hopefully, it'll be just like my village. Okay, so
Want to add anything, Will?
Yeah, so I think, to share a Jensen and video story, it was the first time I'd ever presented at his management team meetings, and the conversation was all around, this was 2017, 16, 17, what the size of the pharma market for NVIDIA was going to be in the GPUs. And I'd done some quick back of the envelope CEO math, and I said, oh, $1 billion plus. And I think everybody looked at me like I was crazy. So I did leave NVIDIA and I went to go work at Lilly because I really wanted to do some of the things that you could do with the AI and the GPUs, and then realized that our data wasn't ready, right? And so we had to make a big, quick investment in getting the data ready. So one of the big areas that I think quantum will have an impact is around synthetic data. And it's synthetic data for very, very complex diseases. It's at the chemistry, small molecule level. It's in formulation. It's in rare diseases where we have limited data, and where it's also in women's health, where historically, for clinical trial reasons, we can't really use women of childbearing age for certain types of clinical trials. So synthetic data, I think, is huge. But more importantly than all the use cases that we're talking about, where I think it'll change pharma, the chemicals industry, is where we've all failed to really understand physics and chemistry the way we needed to understand it. There's a reason you take 2 years of chemistry and you take physics before they let you get to biology, right? And I think we'll go back and start to better understand that, which is the educational system will then need to considerably morph in order for us to realize the value of it. And AlphaFold doesn't do that really well just now. Some of the diffusion models consider it, but finding novel places on the targets to bind, understanding the concept of quantum tunneling and how that matters as we break those energy barriers, those are things that I think biologists are going to need to get a handle on. But the use cases are a dime a dozen. I'm less concerned about the use cases. I'm less concerned about quantum computing maturing. I'm more concerned with how do we morph our education system at all levels, executives all the way down, so we start to understand some of those first principle things that we all skimmed over because we wanted to get to the good part. And at least in my case, the good part was biology, not physics or chemistry.
So building off of that, Will, can you talk a little bit about what the research is that you're doing at MIT, and then also the training that you're doing to make these engineers that now are going to work at all these companies that are going to be developing these quantum systems?
Yeah, sure. My research is trying to make quantum computers more reproducible, extensible, scalable. We're a university, right? So we're not building the largest machines. That's what industry does. But our goal is to really help them learn how to scale. And we've done that in a few cases. One example is that we developed something called a tunable coupler. 2 qubits need to connect to each other and interact. And it used to be that was always on, and that was hard to calibrate. Google tried to make a processor that did that many years ago. But we said, hey, why not have a little switch in between the two qubits that lets you turn on and off the coupling between them? Google adopted that, and then within about a year, they had a Sycamore processor, which led to one of the first beyond classical demonstrations in 2019. So that's just one example. We do everything from materials and fab up to 16, 25 qubit emulations. In terms of education, we already mentioned the professional development courses. We made those back in 2018, really because we could see that this is going to be important. More people are going to pivot to quantum than are going to come through MIT and then go out and become quantum physicists. So we did that. It's been pretty successful, more than 5,000 learners since then. We're now making an executive course, which is maybe a 4-hour version of it. I should mention that the other courses, there's 4 of them and each one's 4 weeks long. So most executives don't have time to do that, but they can find 4 hours maybe on a weekend or something. So that's our course 5. At the university, we are considering what it means to teach something called quantum engineering. And what is that discipline? So quantum science, we know pretty well. Physics, we know pretty well. But if we want to train people from across the institute to go out and be productive, participants in this quantum revolution, we need people from a university language from every department, right? Not just physics and electrical engineering, but chemistry, biology, even the Sloan School, right? Because of course, if we want to commercialize this, we need people who understand business and how to do business with a technology that is somewhat ambiguous at an early stage. So all that is to say that we are developing new curricula at MIT to help define what is quantum engineering. How do you teach it? We need to write textbooks. It's an ongoing effort. We don't have the answers yet, but we have people that are on task.
Awesome, great. And I will say that the class is long, the current class. I only made it through the first half, like the first month, and then I got like tied up and stuff, and then I couldn't finish it. So
well, the first 2 courses, the fundamentals are the ones that are most important.
It was great.
Yeah, that's right.
But looking forward to the executive one. So Christoph, can you tell us a little bit about the key investments that you're seeing in applications of quantum?
Yeah. So I think one thing to say about investment is that in the field, in industry, there are pretty much 3 categories of companies these days. So there's the Google, Amazon, Microsoft making their own investments, doing R&D, and they're very public about that. I mean, in particular, since December with the new Wheeler chip from Google, and then topological qubits allegedly from Microsoft, and then Amazon. There are public companies you hear a lot about, IonQ, D-Wave, because they're public, they make also a lot of noise. And there's a plethora of companies, I mean, startups, VC-backed, and I'm playing in that category. So VC for quantum is between, depending on the years, 2 to 3 billion per year, more or less. We've looked at 600, 700 companies over the years. So it starts to be sizable. And there are new companies being created, I would not say every day, but for sure every month, university startups all around the world. I mean, there's not an infinite number of ecosystems worldwide, but there's Boston, but not only Boston, of course. I mean, there are other places where things are happening, and we see quite a number of interesting ones. The trend these days, I'd say, from our perspective, so we're investing from a second fund that we're currently raising, and we're making new investments. So it's probably much less about the quantum computers themselves, because the technology is here, the companies have been created, and there's not an infinite number of modalities of qubits that you can think of. I mean, science is science, and I think there are limits to that. So you've got ions, atoms, silicon spins, or photons, etc. But what we're really interested in now, and I think that's important for our second fund, is really focusing more on the application, on the software. I believe it's rather clear what the roadmaps for the companies are on the hardware side, but at some point you need to run the machines with some software that is adapted, and that's going to get you to an interesting result. So Qubit Pharmaceuticals was one of our first investments. For drug design, working also on materials design. I think it's important. For software, we like companies that combine GPUs and quantum processors. because it's really hard to be a software company running only on quantum. I mean, you want to generate money, you want to have revenues, customers, etc. So I think the combination is good. But we anticipate we'll see more of that. I mean, we're working on a project on CFD, computational fluid dynamics, for example, these days. Not an easy topic for quantum, but interesting stuff to do with GPUs, for example. So it's going to be a company also combining several technologies. And I can anticipate there's going to be lots of other things. We see a lot of materials design, solid state, condensed matter physics, also GPUs and quantum processors. So we'll see that. And also an interesting aspect is the supply chain. So the companies that are building the components, like the electronics, the cables, etc., to build these quantum computers, because the industry is growing. There's need for reliable technologies. I would not say cheap, but like cost-effective, I think, approaches to building machines. And that's also a big trend that we're seeing and we're interested in as an investor.
All right, well, I'm going to open it up to the audience to see if you guys have any questions for the panel. Does anyone have a question? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, okay.
Well, thank you for this insightful panel. Actually, I work with a project with the World Bank on cryptography and whatsoever. So I'm interested in what we're looking at, that the quantum computing is one of the things that are considered as a beast to the cryptography world. Like our latest researchers says that if we reached out to 13 million qubits, we can crack the cryptography. So I just want to know your insights on this. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, so indeed, a quantum computer at scale running something called Shor's algorithm would be able to defeat our current, what's known as public key crypto systems. That sounds like a lot of jargon, but what it really means is that if you've ever seen a movie and two people exchange a briefcase, they have the secret keys inside, then they can communicate for as long as they have those keys available to them. But we don't usually exchange briefcases with our banks and everyone else we want to talk with. So the question is, how do you initialize or initially send that person a key that you can then both use if you don't have a secure channel? That's what public key crypto systems set up. And that's what Peter Shor's algorithm will attack. We just got unlucky in the 80s when we decided which one we're going to use. We happened to use one that looks like RSA, also Diffie-Hellman. There's a couple other ones, but all of the ones that we currently use today are susceptible to attack by future quantum computers. At the same time, of course, we know that. And so from 2015, I believe, NIST here in the US, ETSI in Europe, came up with what are called post-quantum crypto systems. And so these are classical crypto systems that do the public key exchange, but they do it in a different way. They're based on a mathematical field of lattices. Those were released last year. They've been stress tested a little bit. We'll, of course, want to stress test them more. But we need to switch over to those now. And the reason is that we believe they're immune to attack by a quantum computer. We also need to switch over because it's going to take time and money to do that switch over, probably a good 5 years and a lot of money. And then the third reason is because we want to be forward secure. So even if you believe that we won't have a Shor capable machine for, say, 15 or 20 years, there is information that we are encrypting right now that we want to retain security over in the future. That's called forward security. And there are, of course, nation states that just vacuum up information and stick it on a hard drive, just waiting for that day when they've got a quantum computer. So we need to switch over now.
I think he said it very nicely, but I think there are people who are actually deploying it. I believe that Apple has it with the iMessaging system, and Zoom has it for some of their communications, specific, not for all of it, I believe, but I'm not an expert there. But the keys, that's what I was mentioning, right? In it's RSA, that's the protocol which is broken. The AES key itself is not broken, right? But once you break the protocol, you can find out the key, right? So I think it's better to move to PQC, right? Quicker, for organizations and the whole world. And I think it's going to happen, right? So people will move to PQC.
Yeah, except for Bitcoin, which is a big deal, actually.
Hi. Sorry, I wanted to ask, as companies now are, especially large established companies, are considering what the new generation of AI means for them and how to get their data in order, what are some of the hurdles that you think companies will need to identify and surpass in order to operationalize either the hybrid of AI and quantum, or bringing, their computational challenges, into the next generation of technology to solve it?
Yeah, so we recently did some work with LEK Consulting, and it was focused around understanding the life sciences and pharma industry with respect to where they were in their quantum journey. And Delia is here, so definitely find her if you'd like more details around that. But we were pleasantly surprised at the number of companies that were formulating and or developing their AI strategy. More than 50% of the companies that we surveyed knew what quantum was, were either developing and or experimenting with quantum computing, and really focused on how we could bring that together. I think BCG is also here, and one of the other things we've learned from AI is those that tend to reap the benefits are the ones that understand and adopt it in the right way that makes sense for their corporate strategy. So it all depends on, what the corporate strategy and how do we want to then implement that within the environment. Key things we're seeing happening, it's an innovation ecosystem approach. So what Nash alluded to that's happening in Singapore or Japan, where you've got the infrastructure that the quantum computers are bringing to bear, the combination of public-private funding, and then you've got companies that come into that ecosystem with a specific purpose. In our case, it's centered around biology and chemistry for better target understanding, drug discovery. That tends to be the formula, and I don't think there's a place that knows how to do that better than Kendall Square.
I think one obstacle is a little bit, from my perspective, the quantum industry itself, actually. I think, we're doing this kind of events, and we're doing them all around the world. I think counted for the first trimester, I think we, as a fund, I think we were, from everywhere, from Paris, Tokyo, Brisbane, etc. And I realize every time that the narrative about quantum is not really well crafted by the industry itself. It's really hard for the industry, for laymen who don't have necessarily a quantum culture to understand what it is about. I mean, people are telling you about fault tolerant, about analog, about different modalities of machines, and then it's next year, and then it's in 50 years, and who knows? I mean, so it's, I think the industry has not matured enough, and that's something I regret to try to correct and try to work on that. But it's a challenge, and I think I hope that through all our efforts and this kind of discussion as well, we're not going to get there. But I think the narrative is not clear enough. It should be, because I mean, we can craft the story. I mean, there are good points to talk about, but then there are fights and this and that. And for adoption, I think it's a challenge. So that's something that needs to happen in the community, to have a clearer narrative about quantum, the applications, the horizon, what to do with it, even the vocabulary, to be honest. I mean, it's not that well defined for many things. So that's a bit of a challenge, but that's where ecosystem level approaches are important. Having people in the same place, having access to infrastructures, this kind of thing. We're working a lot with an ecosystem not too far from here, 4 hours drive north in Sherbrooke in Quebec, where they have done that, put everybody in the same place. There are the machines, the test beds, software, the hardware, etc. That makes it easier. And I think from my perspective, also talking maybe a little bit about Boston, I think there's been recent announcements. It's going into the right direction, definitely, with more companies coming. We have a couple of our own portfolio companies coming from Europe, because we think that's the right spot where to be. I mean, like Qblocks, for example, from the Netherlands is coming soon. We've got Alice and Bob here, is a French company, not a portfolio company, but a company we like. So they're here. So having more people sharing and getting to spread the news and be realistic also about what they do. Pascal is here as well. I think that's really key for me.
I think it is a very good question, right? So some history here. So firstly, I'd say when I first got into quantum, it was a QTB event in Santa Clara in 23. It was 1 month into it, and I heard Matt speak, okay, about life sciences and the number of drugs we have. I think you had, was it 10,000 or 20,000? The number of drugs which are FDA approved was so small, okay, and and then I went back to thinking about high performance computing in the medical space, right? It was actually my smallest revenue, okay, in terms of investment, okay. And then this was just in the life sciences spaces, right? So now we step forward a few more years as nobody wanted to invest in GPUs, okay, in those days, right? I mean, HPC, everybody wanted to stick on CPUs. It was good for my business, right? I was selling CPUs. But, the people who invested in GPUs were potentially the oil and gas folks, for example, right? So nobody knew, right, how to actually put a GPU into their data center across the planet. There were a few financial guys who were putting GPUs in there, right? Suddenly AI happened, right? But luckily, right, when you ask the question about data, right? Luckily, in about 2005, when the cloud, around 2005 to 7, when the cloud was actually happening, and all the enterprises were like figuring out, oh shoot, I need to have a private cloud, and I need to have a public cloud. So they figured out the data problem. Okay. Now suddenly AI came with GPUs, and now they have another problem, right? Most of the stuff they want to do in AI, yes, you could do with some of the data which is there in the public cloud, but they needed a private cloud, right, which could deploy GPUs. And everybody's scrambling now, right, to go put these private cloud GPUs, and that's where there's a huge, you saw Dell's revenue numbers that they put out there. You've seen Supermicro; all of them are doing extremely well. HPE, right, because the private cloud is building for GPUs. They're all scrambling to answer your question, right? So your next question was like, will they be ready for quantum? Okay, and that quantum stuff needs to happen now, right, in terms of planning, because otherwise everybody will be scrambling, right? They may be able to use some of their public cloud stuff, which is okay, but there's still going to be a lot of private cloud data that they'll want to use, which is, in terms of countries, it could be in sovereign countries, and enterprises, it could be like, what, I need to run my private cloud. So that whole notion of putting a quantum computer in a AI plus HPC plus quantum, enterprises need to start planning now, right? And I don't think every enterprise is doing, but some of the stuff that we showed here in our are doing it, right? So yes, it is going to be a process. It'll kind of hit them like it did in AI, and so enterprises need to be ready.
I'll be super brief. I just wanted to sort of second what Christoph mentioned, because this is something I experienced firsthand when I was doing AI. It was, when I'm a postdoc, and I was a happy camper, not knowing how it's gonna turn out. You were just solving really cool problems, and suddenly it became very popular. And then it was a challenge to explain to people what we're doing and why we're doing this. And it was not an easy task. The narrative building was the narrative we built was so poor and so technical that nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But now it's just completely reversed, and everybody wants to talk about it all the time because it's become so popular, because companies like OpenAI have built that narrative for the public. So when I was talking about earlier about how we need to pitch in the context of life sciences, how we need to pitch to biologists that this is not 10, 20, 30 years in the future. This is now. This is happening right now. So you need to use this, and you need to figure out what fundamental problems you want to solve with that. I think it's really, really important. We have to develop a language and a sort of a communication strategy around that.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for all of these insights. So incredible. I'm actually a student here. I'm at Yale. Yale has an incredible quantum hub and actually our big quantum computing hackathon about 2 weekends. So very, very exciting there. Quantinuum comes and speaks in like every other week. And so it's really, really awesome. But Yale's also a really huge climate and energy hub. And I know, Christoph, you have an ESG tab on your website. And so I'm curious, we're hearing all of these things about, oh my goodness, energy for AI, AI for energy, all of this compute power. What would we have to expect from the energy side of things when it comes to quantum AI?
Maybe say a few words, and maybe Will can complement. I'm pretty sure. I was a couple of weeks ago at a very big conference in Washington, the ARPA-E conference, and for the first time, they had a panel on quantum computing for energy. And I was really surprised. Actually, it was a huge room, 3,000 executives from U.S. industry, oil and gas, on all kinds of resources, renewables, etc. Lots of debates about that. I mean, that was good. So there are tons of applications of quantum for energy. The other aspect is, I think, is a little bit contentious because you want to see the proof. Is quantum going to reduce your energy consumption for high performance computing? I think in principle, yes. I think Olivier has some points to say about that. I'm pretty sure as well. There's an initiative called the Quantum Energy Initiative, called QEI, which is also something pretty interesting. We organized a workshop with Alain Aspect, actually, back in October in France. It was on that specifically. So I'd say there are promises. It's one angle where quantum could give an advantage, which is not strictly speaking computational, like faster, in order to get faster to a solution, something like that. But I still would like to see the proof. I think on paper that could work, but show me a benchmark on a real life problem where you compute kilowatt hour with the classical machine, kilowatt hour with the quantum. In principle, yes, it can be huge even, but I think we still need to see the demonstration on a real life use case.
I guess what I would add to that is that, if you look at some of the demonstrations that have been done, quantum computer versus classical computer today, it's been on toy problems. And in those cases, yeah, hands down, the quantum computer used a lot less power. If you look at the random circuit sampling example from Google, 100 kilowatts and 53 to 72 qubits versus the largest supercomputer in the world with 40,000 processors running full time, right? It's not even a comparison, right? On the other hand, we know that, to realize the full promise of quantum computing, that we will need to do error correction in the future. And error correction requires that a quantum computer run in tandem with a classical computer. And so there, of course, you now are burning the power of the classical large-scale high-performance computer. But then I would say one more thing, which is that if you look at it that way, you'd say, okay, yeah, my energy bill is the same. But remember, what problem are you solving, right? And if you're solving a problem that would have taken, say, the top one computer in the world 10,000 years, and now I can do it in 24 hours, you basically save 10,000 years minus 24 hours worth of energy bill, even though you're burning power at the same rate. So I think that we have to remember that even though in the end a quantum computer may use as much power as our largest classical computers today, because they're running in tandem with those classical computers, they're solving problems that if you just added up the energy bill for that would be astronomical. So it's not just being faster, it's also lower energy.
I have one question for the panel. So my last question for our panel is, if we're sitting here in 5 years, what are we going to be talking about?
Oh gosh. I'm in the Nash age range, so I'm going to be a lot closer to retirement and a beach in Southern California, very close to Google's quantum computer. No, I actually think that computational sciences will be further embedded into the way we work. And it's going to be integrated across AI, quantum, physics space, whatever the narrative and story we tell, it's going to be a lot more part of everything we do.
Yeah, I think in 5 years, I would like to see a quantum computer here, actually, in that space. I mean, it's not very big, actually. It's a dilution fridge or a machine like Pascal. It's a couple of meters square. I like to see it here, and people at CIC here, and people who are working on projects, on applications, running stuff on it, and developing applications. And I think that would be success.
I think I've stated my comments before, but in 4 years, right, in 2029, right, we named a machine Apollo for a reason, right? We believe we would have landed applications which would have created value for customers, right? In bringing this Gen QAI and other concepts in combination with CPUs and GPUs, and we'll have some real tangible products that customers will have, which is created value for the customer as well as for the quantum company also, right? So I think it is going to happen. The machines that we're planning will land with very, very good error rates and qubits that we'll be able to use with generative quantum AI, GenQ AI, as well as other companies such as Qubit Pharma, right, who can use this machine also to bring value, right? So I believe that we'll have value created for the industry, real value, right? It's not going to be an experiment anymore, right? And that's my vision, and I think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. When people ask, when are you going to have a quantum computer? Or when they asked Jensen that and he said, yeah, 15 to 30 years. What he's thinking in his brain, right, is, oh, when are we going to have a quantum computer that can solve protein folding and develop the next drug? And, that is a highly mature quantum computer. If you think back to classical electronic computing, there was a lot of applications that were done in the 50s and the 60s that were not what we're doing today with classical computers that are highly mature, but still brought some value, as you were saying, Nash. So I think we'll be here in 5 years and we'll be saying, yeah, we've got some quantum computers that are generating revenue. And boy, I wish it could do so much more.
We're generating revenue today. Right?
Yeah, well,
I think
sure.
I think it's creating value for the end user, right? Which is, a drug company, for example, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that Jensen said, right, last week was, quantum computer. He said maybe you should call it a quantum instrument. That was one of his statements. Then he said, hey, you know what? You got to go pick an application which you cannot do on a classical computer. Okay, and if you can do it on a classic computer, it's pointless to go invest in a quantum computer. Was his point? Very good point, right? And I think what we'll have is you'd have created value with an application workflow that you couldn't have done on a classical computer, right? Otherwise, it's pointless.
I agree with that. I think we'll also be complaining that it's not doing as much as we wish it could, just like all of us complain today that the classical computers we have just don't do enough, because whatever you've got, you're going to want to do more.
Yeah, could not agree more. I think in 5 years, I fully expect, I think, some commercial product in the market, which is because of quantum technology. But I think also we would have. I'm hoping with the way things are going, the speed at which they are going, I think we would have made some breakthrough in existing problems in building quantum computers, like fault tolerance. And speaking from a more of a at an enterprise level and for large companies, I think most companies, just like they have AI teams, they will have some sort of quantum task forces trying to evaluate the technologies relevant to their industry and sort of being ready for it when it becomes commercially available. So I think you'll be hearing a lot more about quantum, just like suddenly AI became the buzzword and every company had an AI logo on their slide deck. It probably won't be at that scale, but to some level, I think quantum is going to become much more talked about technology than it is today. So definitely can expect that in 5 years.
So I want to gently nudge. I don't think we should call it a scientific instrument by any stretch of the imagination, because inside the walls of at least life sciences and pharmas, we've made tremendous progress in validation and compliance for computing, and much less progress with instrumentation. So you will confuse the regulators to the extent that you will add a burden on use that I just don't think is worth the time, the energy, or the hassle. So I'm just going to disagree with him. I'm happy to wrap up an email if you need me to. That's part one. Part two is I do think, at least from a qubit perspective, somewhere between our thinking is 2032, we expect to have a software stack built that's using quantum on a quantum computer. We will have done a ton of what we call quantum mechanics or quantum science through, I'm still confused on simulation emulation. Depending upon what part of the world you are, we use those terms differently. And we will be doing a lot of that on classical computing. But I think the wonderful part about an example you shared about the problem space, right? Quantum opens up a whole new door, a whole new lens of the types of problems we can solve. And I really wish that, unlike with AI, we figured out where we need to use quantum as opposed to trying to use AI for every single thing, because there's a lot of things we're using AI and GPUs right now, especially in healthcare and life sciences, that I honestly don't think is worth the time or the hassle.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for this wonderful panel. I think we're going to get a couple closing remarks. All right.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our wonderful panelists and our moderator. Thank you so much. So I have a quick story for the students, because a lot of the discussion today was really geared towards experts. And 20 years ago, I came to Cambridge and Boston for the first time in my life. And I walked into a classroom at MIT for Campus Preview Weekend, where someone was actually teaching quantum mechanics, a lecture on it. And I understood nothing on the board. And as a kid who was actually very bored in high school, I decided to come to MIT. And it's a very full circle moment for me to actually, as now CBO of a company that's represented here at a map, come find out about us, to do closing remarks for such a prestigious panel of people. And so there is hope for your future, is my point. So, again, thank you all so much, because you are the ones that made this a successful event, celebrating 100 years of quantum science and technology. And thank you again to the speakers and the panelists. I actually had the opportunity to interview a number of you and learn more about you as individuals. And really today we heard about the vision for the future. And, we learned about the impact that quantum can have across chemistry, software, startups, pharma, academia, and venture capital, from everything including cybersecurity, complex problems in drug discovery, delivery, imaging analysis, and more. So here's to all of you and to 100 more years of advancements in science. And there's some cake to celebrate the 100-year anniversary. So make sure you get some food and cake and celebrate as well. So thank you all again so much. Let's hear it for the panelists and for Larissa for putting this excellent event together with Andrea.